data science, what they don't teach you in school. So generally what we're planning to cover is how to get a job without applying for one, what to do if you don't have experience, data science in the real world, different paths and roles, and how to stand out from the crowd and progress in your career.
If you're new to this channel and you're keen to learn the latest tips, tricks, and tools for working more effectively with data, please hit the subscribe button for weekly videos.
Here's a little introduction to me. So I was working in London for the last 11 years or so. I was working at Morgan Stanley and HSBC. So over there, I was helping to review data science projects and models and everything like that. Also did a bit of teaching as well. So I was training some of the data analyst teams and data science teams for HSBC. And so I started basically recording some of these things, sticking them online, and I basically ended up with 14,000 students. So I also do some online teaching. I moved back to New Zealand just before COVID, lucky me. And so since then, I've been doing some consulting. I've been working with startups and basically helping to mentor data scientists, help review their work, and really help kind of bridge the gap between companies and what they would like to try and achieve and data scientists, which can sometimes be a little bit get a little bit technical sometimes. So at university, you learn a lot of skills. You get into a lot about how to build a model, right? A lot about different types of algorithms and different things like that. And it's easy to try and rush off sometimes and want to just take all of this and apply it and without finding out all the things that are important to a business. And this is tricky sometimes because businesses and data scientists talk very different languages. And because of that, there often tends to be a bit of a disconnect. And this disconnect can lead to projects not always working out as well as you'd like them to. So hopefully some of the things I cover in here will help to kind of avoid some of those situations and help for you to have more meaningful projects and make a bigger impact in the data science projects that you're working on. All right, so as mentioned, so I help executives and their data teams develop more impactful and profitable data science projects. So a little example of that, I've been recently working with a startup called Channel. And I've been working with an amazing data scientist who you might know here, Nicole. So Nicole's here in the audience today. And one of the reasons why I love doing this is it's just been so amazing working with data scientists, people like Nicole, to really try and, I guess, help to share my experience and make projects like more effective. So maybe Nicole, you could be happy to come up for a sec and share a little bit about maybe some of the stuff that we kind of do together. So.
There's my profile photo. So hi everyone. It's actually fun seeing people that I know from the club. I was a member of the data science club last year as part of the executive team, and now I'm working in industry. So it's good to come back and have this full circle experience seeing all of you. I worked with Jonathan at Channel, as he said. He was sort of the lead data scientist and I was under his wing. And we did a lot of NLP work, so natural language processing work. And a lot of those proof of concepts that came from my work there are now in production, and I'm currently working to productionize them as well, so we could use them in our app. So it's been a very fulfilling experience to have experimental projects sort of be used by actual clients. And I'd say if I could kind of categorize the main things I learned from Jonathan in his time as our lead data scientist. The first thing is probably just not to make your whole life about work. So from
Yep.
a guy who, had all of these cool positions at Morgan Stanley and HSBC, such a high-achieving individual that may come as a surprise to some of you. That was the main thing that I learned from him. But the biggest investment is in yourself, in your physical health, your mental health, and you want to be in data science not just for the next few years, but the next 10 years, the next 20 years. So it's worth it to invest in, not burning out and having sustainable work attitudes. And also, I think related to that is the thought of not really relying on one job to learn all of the skills that you need in your career. So Jonathan does a lot of consulting, and I think I learned from him that you could do that as well. Regardless of your experience, there's something you could contribute to companies or to hackathons or to just people who need data skills or companies who need data skills. I upskill a lot outside of work, and I also set times outside of work to work on not just technical skills, but soft skills like writing, and I learned that from Jonathan. The second main learning would be related to, I guess, the mindset of being a data scientist in the real world, which is when you're given a big problem, a really, really big problem, a good approach to tackle that problem, an immediate good approach is to break down the problem into minimum viable, realistic solutions. And instead of kind of theorizing on the perfect solution, is to just pump out a solution that works and that's good enough. And spend the rest of your time trying to test it on stakeholders and trying to gather feedback from stakeholders. Because then in doing that, you won't waste a lot of time and you're making sure that your contributions are relevant and that your contributions are actually wanting to be used by people. So yeah,
Cool.
those are the two
All
main
right.
things.
All right. Thank you very much. So, I mean, I got to say, Nicole has been amazing, and I think there's so many things that she's done really, really well, and I would say that there's a lot of things that you can learn from what Nicole has done, not just in terms of a lot of technical skills and things that she's done there, but also, as you mentioned, a lot of the soft skills and steps that she's taken to, like, what you might not know. Nicole actually landed 3 different internships in her last year studying her master's, which is really, really impressive, actually, right? And it's some of the things that I think can really help. So at some point, I'd love to talk to Nicole a little bit more, to interview her, to get a little bit more about her journey and how she did some of these different things. You're going to have the benefit of actually being able to hear Nicole speak next week as well about a little bit more about the technical side of some of the projects she's been working on. But I would say that some of the things other than that are really things to pay attention to as well. So I'll tell you a little bit about my experience as well. So how do you get a job without actually applying for one? Now, one of the things that I kind of like to talk about is, well, I don't think I've actually ever got a job from applying for one, right? And you might think, oh, what are you talking about? How can you get a job without applying for one? Now, these days, there's a lot of job boards and a lot of job postings, and it's easy to jump online, go look up a few profiles and everything, and think, oh, geez, I need to go off and learn this and this and this and this and this, and then I'll go apply for this job. You send off your CV and everything, and then you don't hear anything, right? Or you send through your CV, and then you get rejected, and it can be quite a disappointing and frustrating place to be in sometimes. Now, one of the things that you have to understand is, having sat on the other side of the table as well, where I've actually done some of the recruiting, is that when you put out a job on the internet, there could be like 100 people that apply for that one job, right? And so when you put your CV out there, the chances are that you even get an interview is really, really small. And then you might have like 5 other candidates or something that you're competing against who might be just like 1% better than you, or not even better than you, but they just wrote the CV slightly better, or they just seem to be a slightly better fit for what the situation is. And that can be really, that can be quite demoralizing sometimes when you're in that situation. But when you're applying for jobs that way, now I'm not saying that you know, that never go do this, but it's really perhaps not one of the most effective ways of actually landing a role. Right. So what are some of the things that you can do instead? So as mentioned, like Nicole, she got like 3 internships, right? Now, for myself as well, I got an internship when I was studying at university, and one of the easiest ways to do that is actually sign up for a paper where you get some sort of industry placement to start with, right? Basically, you're guaranteed to get your foot in the door at a company, right? And from there, you can go in, get practical experience, and that's going to show up really, really well on your CV, right? Because a lot of you guys are studying right now. You've got some of the skills, right? But what you might be lacking is a bit of the experience, right? So what do you do if you don't have the experience? Now, when we're talking about experience, there's the commercial side of things, right? So you know some data science skills, but you don't have the industry sort of background and knowledge. You don't know really kind of what it's like working in a commercial environment with a team and all this sort of thing. So there's that side of thing. Now, the other thing that you might be concerned about as well is that you don't have experience in a particular language or framework or technology stack or something like that as well. And one of the things that I've noticed is that this tends to lead people to go off and study lots and lots and lots and lots of different technologies. The problem with that is that there's too many technologies, right, to really go off and learn them all. So what I want to do is really give you the confidence that, you know, given the skills that you already have, you should be able to take those and transition those to learn other skill sets. So just a little bit of I guess, of my own experience in this. A lot of times going into different jobs that I've had over the years, I haven't actually known the technology stack before getting the job in the company, right? The companies basically kind of understand that, oh, well, you've done this, that's pretty much transferable to this, right? But what you do want to demonstrate is that, hey, you've got the ability to pick stuff up and learn it. And how do you demonstrate that? How do you do that? Again, this is one of the problems with like maybe just doing a course, whether it's at university or an online course or whatever it is basically that when you're doing a homework assignment, right, there's always an answer, right? You haven't had to fight through like the things that might not work out, right? Because a lot of the stuff is all laid out there for you, right? In terms of the data is already there, the question is already there, right? And one of the things that you face in the real world is that a lot of times you have neither of those, right? And so by getting out there and doing some sort of project, you can really show that you have some relevant skills that you can transfer. So for myself, my first job out of university was actually working as a web developer. And again, I was working with a technology stack that I had never used before, but I had already taught myself to do some web development in my free time, right? And I had done some projects, right? Building a website for, my parents' business and different projects like that, right? And so, you know, those skills are transferable. And all throughout my career, similar type of story. People basically look at you and go, oh yeah, well that's more or less the same as this, so, you know, should be fine, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about data science in the real world. Now, as mentioned before, a lot of times when you have an assignment, you're given the data and you're given the question. And a lot of times you don't have either of those. And so one of the things that you probably have to spend a lot more time doing sometimes is actually going, what is the question really, right? And this is kind of moving away from the technical side of things and more into the soft skill sides of things, to be able to really diagnose and ask the stakeholders, why do you actually want to do this? What are you hoping to achieve out of this? How is this being done currently? And then with all of these pieces of information, then you're in the position to start to formulate what that solution looks like, right? And then, once you understand what the question is, then you can actually start to see, do you actually have the right data to answer those questions? And again, in this situation, a lot of times you might not, right? That data might not actually be there. And so when you're studying in academics data science, there's a lot of focus on, okay, well, what are the algorithms? How do they work, right? And there's a lot of focus on the modeling side of things, right? But in the real world, that's only like one thin little slice of everything that needs to be done, right? Now you might go, it's like, okay, well, I'm a data scientist, and so I'm only going to work and focus on this like thin slice of things. But unless you have a team who's able to support you in some of these other areas, right, those things can then start to hold up your projects, right, and stop you from being able to move forward. And so a lot of times, what you have to do sometimes is actually step into those other roles a little bit to be able to go, hey, this is holding me up, let's go figure out something over here. This part's holding me up, let's go figure out something over here, right? Or at least be able to communicate where you're getting stuck, right? So, a few points that I think are worthwhile to keep in mind. Okay. So, okay. So, the other thing is, in data science, there's lots of related kind of paths and roles, right? So this is kind of related to the previous thing I was talking about, in that the data science piece usually focuses on the modeling. But unless all of these other things are in place, you can't do that, right? So the model is effectively useless if you don't have the right data, right? And you can only really focus on getting the right data if you have the right question, right? Because at the very least, you need data, right? Because a lot of times companies will go, oh, I have a whole bunch of data. Maybe tell me, what can you actually do with this, right? And so then you might get a bunch of data. You might start digging into it and go, oh, look, I found this correlation and that correlation and different things like that. And then it turns out that, oh, well, that, like maybe those things aren't necessarily that meaningful or useful to actually solving the business question. So one thing that is often taught as well is like data mining, right? So in data mining, you're basically taking like a big, large data set and you're trying to go figure out, okay, what can I discover from all of this? And it's like, that is an approach for starting to dive into the data and figure out what's there. But the one problem I have with data mining is that computers are very good at picking up relationships, even if those relationships aren't that meaningful or that useful, right? So it can be like looking for a needle in a haystack sometimes when you don't even know that there's a needle there, right? So again, it's useful to come back and start asking the questions, what are we actually hoping to find in this data, right? Why are we looking at this data to start with? What would be a really good outcome from actually building a model or something around this data, right? Because if you don't figure those things out, you could end up with a model, right? But if you have some data, you could end up with a model and you can go away and build something that isn't necessarily meaningful at the end of it, right? So different things to review there. So, okay, so in terms of the different roles and paths, you have the modeling part, then you have the part which is kind of more of a business analyst type of role where you're trying to figure out what needs to be done. Then you have, I guess, a bit of a data analyst role. Is kind of you can spend some time exploring the data which is already there to see what you can pick out of that. There's a lot of time looking and reviewing the data quality of things. That's something that you're probably going to spend a lot of time doing in data science, right? It is just figuring out if the data is good enough to answer the question. And then out the other side of things, you've got more the engineering side of things, where you're actually deploying the models, right? So deploying the models, putting them into production, that starts to need either kind of software application development, or it needs data engineering, where you're starting to take all the pieces and put them into a bit of a pipeline, right? So just to give you a little bit more context around that. So usually when you're working in data science, you may be working with something like R or Python, and you're building these scripts which kind of do everything in them. And then with data engineering, you're doing a lot of the same types of processes, but then you're kind of breaking those up into lots of different kind of microservices, right? So maybe instead of using one Python script or something, you're using half a dozen different services on AWS or Microsoft Azure, and you're trying to piece all of these together. And so it's a similar but different sort of role. And right now, so because data science has been around for a little while now, we've kind of been through these different phases of things, where originally we had companies basically hire data scientists into the organizations to say, hey, look, can you maybe do something with our data? Data scientist puts together a model, and then they go, it's like, oh, we're not getting the true value out of this because we haven't put it into production, right? So especially a lot of the DevOps guys and everything like that have been going, it's like, oh, well, like if it's not in production, then it's not valuable, right? Which is partially true, partially not. But and so now we're seeing a trend where there's much more demand for data engineers as well, to basically take a lot of the data science models and start to put them into production, right? So that's a bit of a trend that I've been seeing in the markets. And it sort of makes sense, but here's where it partially doesn't make sense as well. As mentioned, with data engineering, you're doing similar types of things, but using lots and lots of different microservices. And because of that, the iteration time to be able to figure something out is a lot longer. It becomes a lot more technical. It takes a lot longer to do things and to iterate. And sometimes you just need to figure out if something works in the first place, right? Because if it doesn't work in the first place, then there was no point putting it into production, right? And so unfortunately, this is where sometimes companies are getting this a little bit wrong as well, is that they're rushing ahead and they're giving things to engineering before that they've proved that they work, at least in like an experimental type of position. But really, when you're looking at these projects, you really ideally want to be thinking all the way through, right? All the way through. So even if you are sort of a data scientist and you're focusing on the modeling part, what you really want to be thinking about is how eventually will I get this into production, right? And there's the more technical side of it, which you may or may not decide is something that you enjoy doing or like doing. But then the other part of it is really, it's like the data needs to flow automatically from one side to another, right? And for that data to flow automatically from one side to another, we need to be really figuring out what are all the processes required to get this data in an automatic way, right? Get this data in an automatic way, but also other things as well. Like, what is the timing of the data? What is the frequency of the data? Are we talking about real time, or are we talking about by minute, by day, by week, by month? It's kind of these frequencies as well, which can affect your models and affect how that data gets into production. Okay, so as mentioned, data science is only one piece of the puzzle. You got the business problem, data, model, and production. Okay, so how do you stand out from the crowd and progress in your career? So there's a couple of kind of key points here. One, I think it's important to be always constantly improving, right? Now, it's good to study stuff. What I would say is that once you get into a role and you start working on things, really take the time to learn those things that you're doing really, really well, right? And I don't know, I mean, I almost feel a little bit silly to say this, but one of the things that I've noticed over my career, and I mean, I finished my degree like about 20 years ago now, is a lot of people, once they get into the work environment, after a little while, they stop studying, they stop improving, right? And so if you look at the kind of distribution of skills, you have something very positively skewed with a very long tail, right? And where the mean is very close to kind of the low end of things, right? And then you got this long tail where there's some people who are very, very, very good at things, right? And you might look at some of these people and think, oh, geez, it's impossible to like get that good. It's like you don't really need to become that good. All you need to do a lot of times is become better than average, right? And that's actually not very hard to do because average is not a very high bar to cross, right? So, I mean, just to tell you a little bit about my own experience, and this kind of goes back to if you're worried about not having some of the skills that are required to do something before you go into it, as mentioned, you know, a lot of times I didn't know the technology stack before I started working for a company. But not only that, like once I start using something and, you know, if you use it every day and you study it every day, you'll actually get good at it really, really, really fast, right? So, you know, when I first started learning R programming, it was probably about a year until I, you know, basically I started teaching it, right? And what I realized is that I could help a lot of people because nobody bothered to get good at the tools, right? Like a lot of the training was like literally 20 years out of date, right? Because, well, there's new libraries and there's new techniques and there's new standards, and for some reason, nobody's teaching them, right? Which, I don't know, to me is just kind of insane. It's kind of ridiculous. But it's like little things like that, which is almost like it's like a superpower. It's like you do something every day, you keep up to date with all the latest updates, and you specialize something. Within 1 to 2 years or so, you can be really good at pretty much anything, right? So, just want to point that out there. And the other thing I would say, and I think Nicole is particularly good at this as well, is just really having it's this balance of being humble, but also being kind of really confident in stuff as well, right? When you go into a role, sometimes, you know, you're kind of nervous, like, oh, maybe, you know, like you're not good enough, or on the flip side of things, you can be overconfident and be a little bit cocky. And I've definitely made this mistake myself in the past. And when you're either when you don't look to the other people around you to help support you, to develop yourself, then you're really missing out on a lot, right? Because a lot of people, there's one of the things that you realize now that we're getting into these fields, which are vastly more complex, right? So data science is a real specialization on its own as well. Is that there are so many skills to make a project work. And, you know, so I've given you a little bit of an idea of some of the different roles and everything that kind of surround data science. Bit by bit, you're going to have to try and figure out which of these things that you're kind of good at, right? And, you know, where you're not good at them, then you need to be looking to the support of other people to help you with that. Either to help you learn it or to help you, to help you do them, right? And there's when you're getting into some of your first roles, there's this real tendency to go, okay, well, I really want to make a good impression here, right? And again, some things you're going to be really good at, and some things you're not going to be so good at. And instead of fighting these things and going, okay, well, I'm just going to slug this out, and I don't want people to see that I'm not so great at some of these things. You really want to be asking for help, right? Because otherwise, it kind of looks more bad on you than anybody else, actually, right? Because you got stuck and you didn't figure it out, and you didn't ask for help, right? Because then it kind of blocks and holds everybody. It holds everybody up, right? I mean, just to give a few more examples. I mean, I've had the chance to kind of mentor lots of different students in their different roles, right? And there's a real difference between some of the people who do really, really well at the roles, right? So, as mentioned, Nicole has been absolutely amazing in the roles that she does. She comes across and she's just really likable to everybody there, right? But I've also mentored people as well who have, well, they've almost been a little bit too shy, right? They've kind of come into this position where they've managed to get the internship, which is a fantastic start, right? But after you get the internships, you really need to get in there and really impress people, right? And one of the troubles is, as mentioned, first of all, when you get into an internship, depending on the company that you're doing some work for, they might not understand you very well, right? It's because they don't understand data science very well. And so a lot of times if you're looking for guidance on what to do, they might not be able to provide you with that, right? So that's one of the challenges. The other thing is that okay, so I was mentoring another guy once, and one guy, he had an issue where the data was just really, really, really difficult to clean, right? And so, it's going to be way, way more work. And so, without being able to communicate that effectively to the stakeholders, then it would just look bad on him that he didn't get the job done. And, he spent like lots of kind of sleepless nights, like staying up, trying to battle through this and trying to clean up this data, which is kind of fundamentally not that cleanable, right? And so sometimes you will face that, right? And so just kind of be aware that is the case. It's not necessarily you, but you still need to be able to communicate these things in an effective way. Otherwise, it looks like you've, kind of just failed and stuff, right? Which doesn't look good on your part. Another thing I would say as well, I was mentoring another guy, and one of the troubles that, so one of the things was he was doing, a lot of kind of late night jobs and everything as well, on top of the internship, and so when he came in to actually work on the projects, he'd be a bit tired, right? He wouldn't be able to fully dedicate to it and everything. And again, like those things just really don't look so great when you're in these positions. Like this is one of the best opportunities you have to really build up experiences, learn as much as you can, and kind of get your foot in the door somewhere and get a really good sort of endorsement or recommendation for your work that you can then use as leverage, right? To say, hey, I do have all this experience. I learned this and this and this and this. Here's something I can take through to the next job. So really take the opportunity to leverage that and use that as much as you can. Try not to be doing too many other things, right? Okay. So, anyway, got a little gift for you guys. This is, as mentioned, I do a bit of teaching. So I've got this little code here where you can get this little mini course for free if you guys want to take a picture of that. Basically what this is I've got a bunch of FAQ videos for my course. Some of these are on YouTube as well, but what's different here is that this has got all the source code and everything that goes along with it as well. So just a little bonus for you guys there. And yeah, as mentioned, I really love and enjoy working with people like you. I love working with tech people, people in data science, people who are just really keen to take all this new technology and make it into something which is real, and yeah, try and make the world a better place with it, right? So if you want to keep in touch with me, this is my profile on LinkedIn. I'd love to be able to help you out with kind of whatever kind of projects that you're working on. I basically work with people in different ways. As mentioned, I've got the online courses, and I also work with companies and stuff as well. So if you get into a company somewhere, and you feel like, okay, well, this is great, but I don't have kind of any mentor. I don't actually have anybody who actually understands data science, and I'd like somebody with a little bit more commercial experience to guide me through that. Then I can come in, help train you up, and then let you kind of go on your way and just kind of set you off on the right path. So that's one of the things I like to try and help people do. So yeah, cool. So that is the main bit of my presentation. So any questions? Yes.
So for your day, how much time percentage do you actually spend programming, and how much time do you do analysis and problem modeling and stuff?
It's a little hard to say. It depends on the projects and what projects seem to be happening at the time. Yeah, I mean, there's different phases. There's different phases of a project, right? You can spend just as much time figuring out what the project is as you can actually doing the modeling or anything like that, right? In fact, yeah, so that's one of the things really. At university, as mentioned, all the focus is on modeling, but you can't do any of the modeling until like all the data is right, and that can take a really big chunk of the work right there, just figuring out that the data is right. The other thing is that just because you don't have the right data, this is where a lot of people get really stuck as well. If you don't have the right data, you can actually be proactive to actually prescribe what the right data could be. And then that's almost another project in itself, like starting to set those types of things up. Right. So, yeah, I hope that helps. It's, yeah.
Like from your experience, it's like you basically introduce data science to a lot of other companies.
Mm-hmm.
But my main question is that data science today is sometimes to other companies are like a bit new and kind of like a wizardy type of like mystery.
Yep.
And then it's like there's a tendency that if you're like a data scientist, then you'll be perceived as a threat to other developers or other people that are already in the company. And I've looked around on the internet and they've said that sometimes all they want is to slap that kind of like data science sticker, especially or like a company tries to brag that, oh, we use machine learning.
Yep.
Or stuff like that. And how do you actually kind of like encourage or like advertise that data science works, and how do you make it more like collaborative instead of like kind of like threatening their power or authority?
Yep, so if I was to summarize that question, okay, so I guess the first part is data science a threat to other positions, and is data science being used as almost like I don't know, like a in-thing kind of jargon and stuff as well, right? So I think that there's definitely been a lot of hype around data science and AI, right? Unfortunately, that'll probably be the case for a while. I mean, you got all this kind of stuff on TV. I mean, even if you take a look and say read an article about, say, GPT-3 or something like that, and how it passes the Turing test, and how it's gonna, the next thing we're gonna have, and then Elon Musk coming on and saying that, like AI is gonna squash us like bugs, and all these kind of things. So, I think that a lot of people have the perception that AI and data science is a lot smarter than it is, right? And unfortunately, that is kind of the position that we're in right now. Now, there's a upside and a downside to that, right? So the upside to it is basically that companies are interested in and wanting to put investment into data science, right? So that's the good thing. But as you mentioned, to a certain extent, because they want to get in the game and they have no idea what they're actually doing, right? Which is unfortunate in a lot of cases. And this is why part of today's talk is really been focused on saying, this is why there's got to be this kind of education piece and stuff as well. Because without this kind of education piece, we're not going to be able to kind of do the data science projects that we actually want to do, right? And a lot of the times, like what does an actual project look like? You kind of go in there, somebody wants to do something, you get some of the data, you take a look at it, and it turns out to be not quite suitable. Like it needs a lot of work, right? Because either you need a lot of labeling, and labeling is really expensive, right? But there's things you can do, like because you understand data science. Now, here's the thing, like data science is really interesting because you have kind of software engineering skills, you also have some stat skills and stuff as well. And so you'll be able to understand some of these things a lot better than say a software developer. And this is how, I guess, you were asking, how do you really collaborate and augment like what developers are doing? You really want to be able to, I think it's valuable to show that, hey, there's a different way of looking and thinking about things, right? So we can quantitatively define different performance metrics like accuracy and, AUC and all these kind of things. We can kind of quantitatively define how things are doing. So we can test these things, we can measure them, and then we can see how they kind of perform into the future and stuff as well. And I've probably gone like a little off track here, but basically, I don't think that we're a threat to software developers, right? If anything, I think sometimes software developers can sometimes get a little bit annoyed that like a lot of times data scientists don't always write the nicest code, and they don't necessarily think about how to get things into production. But I mean, for myself, that's actually how I started getting involved in data science in the first place. Actually, is the fact that I, was a better programmer than a lot of the statisticians and everything like that. So I could help refactor their code. But like at the end of the day, I think that everybody wants to do a good job, and I think everybody wants to help. So if you can kind of say, hey, I can help you better understand these things. I can help, like design these things and set them up properly. and you kind of get help from the other people as well, then it becomes a much more collaborative effort. And this comes back to the, this comes back to the whole humility thing and everything. Humility and confidence that you won't know everything. You'll never know everything. And one of the biggest traps is that you try to, right? If you try to learn and know it's like everything there is and try to be the best at everything it is, you're basically into the position where you never have the time to do it all, right? So, yeah.
I'm just really curious, what does your job look like? Because so what are some steps you take to formulate a data science strategy for a company? Because as far as I know, I might not be correct, that every company is not the level of maturity in terms of data is not the same. Sometimes you might work with companies that are less mature and don't have like a whole flow of data that is readily like integrated and free to use. Sometimes you might work with companies that are more mature. What sort of companies do you typically work with, and what are the different approach that you take?
When I was living in London, I worked with large enterprises, right? So, and now back in New Zealand, I tend to work more with startups, right? I think they're both quite interesting. So I was kind of seeing the two different sides of things. With big companies, they do have a lot of data there. They do have a lot of money to invest into a lot of things, but you don't always have stakeholders who understand like all the components. The best thing that you can do really is just to get in there and talk through and try and understand what the problems are exactly, right? And this is the same in both situations. And in terms of data maturity, I think that as a data scientist, with your data science training, that's almost like I'd say that's almost like a key part of the job is to go in there and to try and help educate on this piece, because you're going to know it better than anybody else, right? And the trick will be communicating in a way that other people can actually understand you, right? Which is the biggest difficulty I see with a lot of data scientists is that they're not able to explain what they're actually doing or any of the results, because you spend all this time learning about the intricacies of a model, which is just way above anybody's head, right? So I'd say that one of the things that's just really important is just cutting back to the fundamentals. To me, data science is effectively about finding patterns, right? If you don't have a pattern in the data, then you're never going to be able to build a model off of it, right? The pattern has to be there in the first place. And a lot of times, those patterns, you'll be able to talk to the business to understand like what those are. Now, in terms of the sort of helping businesses along that kind of maturity of side of things, there's lots of little clever things that you can do, right? So as mentioned, one of the things is that data labeling is really expensive, right? And so I think a lot of projects will hit the wall when you sort of end up with this data labeling process, and then there's basically isn't a resource to do all of the data labeling, or worse, your job becomes the data labeling, and which can happen quite often and quite easily and stuff as well, that you sign up as a data scientist and now you're just doing lots of data labeling, which is not fun at all. But if you can help advise how you can label this stuff better. For instance, stuff can be labeled automatically as well, right? And this is one thing that I think everybody should be kind of thinking about and doing a lot more of, right? So if you take a look at, say, a company like Tesla or something like that, right? So one of the things that they were kind of really, really clever about is they, they've obviously got machine learning and everything in their cars and everything like that. But the labeling of the data is effectively the driver who drives the car, right? So there's this kind of automatic feedback loop, which then goes off and trains the model, right? And so if we design more of these kind of feedback loops into all of the things that we do, then that's some of the advice that you can give to people. Another example is, you know, the captcha forms, I am not a robot, right? So that's a brilliant idea because that helps to automatically classify images, right? So it labels images so that they can train their image classifiers, right? And so that's a really, really brilliant example of how you can design labeling, right, into an automatic process, right? So you're doing a chatbot or something like that. Design your forms and stuff in a way that, you know, you make a prediction, right? And then the user kind of verifies it, right? And then that can train the chatbot, right? Different things like that, right? Yep. Any other questions?
No, another question I do have.
Yeah.
What resources would you suggest for students to, you know, start self-learning or
Yep.
basically applying their skills to start building a portfolio?
Yeah, I would say the best thing is find a project, right? Find a real life project that you can do, right? Because one of the things is, I mean, you know, I teach courses and stuff as well, and there's lots of courses on the internet that you can do. You've already been through like a degree which you probably spent 3-4 years, whatever, working on. You probably don't need a lot more of that training, right? Maybe there's a few things that you could get up to date with, a few tips and tricks. Like I mentioned, you know, like data cleaning is a big one, just kind of being able to get in there and like really wrangle the data. Other things is being able to visualize the data nicely and stuff as well. It's kind of part of the communication part of things. But really, just getting in there and doing a project, finding something that you can do, that you can demonstrate, hey, look, I've done something, right? And if it's not a course, it's almost a bit better in a way, because it's not like just, it's not like anybody can kind of do a course and kind of go through and like print out a certificate or something like that, right? And it's not as kind of impactful, right? As showing that you've got real experience doing something. And again, it's coming back and, you know, it's really about getting that depth of knowledge, not just the kind of breadth of knowledge. And the breadth of knowledge can be kind of useful too, but you can't go broad and deep on everything, because otherwise you're just studying forever. And that's not good too. Cool. All right, yeah.
What's the longest you've had to work consecutive hours on a project?
Longest consecutive hours on a project. Yeah. In data science, it's like I probably never really worked massive hours on different things. But it's again, it depends what part of your career you're in and what your objectives are. When I was younger, I did really long hours, right? And I think when starting out your career, that's kind of part of it. Like you would just probably do lots of long hours, right? Partially because you're inexperienced and it'll take you longer to do stuff, and you know you'll spend a lot more time like fighting through stuff. You know, but especially when I was like earlier on in my career. I mean, I still kind of do this now, but as mentioned previously, like my kind of philosophy is that anything you want to do and get good at, you have to spend time studying it. And so when you get a job and you start getting requests and you're trying to figure out how to do this thing, which you might not be familiar, and you want to do it the best way that you can, right? That might not be fast, right? Especially to start with. But if you force yourself to do it a good way, right, and you take some time to study and figure out, I don't know, here's 5 different approaches that people took to solve this problem. Now I kind of got a sense of what all of them are, and I'm going to basically force myself to use this way over here because this seems like the best approach. Then, you know, at the end of a few years, you've gotten really good at something, right? Whereas somebody else who just like took the quick route and did something has gotten no better like several years down the track, right? So you know, I'd say don't be afraid to spend more hours, especially to start with. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, when starting out, I mean, I could be working 80 hours a week or something like that. But yeah, fortunately, back in those days, I was also getting paid by the hour, so it's not too bad either. Yep.
Thank you. So I was wondering what sort of startup have you worked with and what was the project like for them? Because I imagine often I hear data science goes with companies like really big companies like banks with a lot of data. But what sort of startups will have a lot of data for you to work with?
Yeah, okay. So startups are interesting, and you'll hear more about this from Nicole next week when she talks about some of the projects that she's doing. Now, so the reason why I think either like a big organization or enterprise or startups is basically that a startup is building a piece of software which is going to be used for a lot of people, right? So you might not have all the data to start with. You might not have a lot of data to start with, but you can kind of get in there, and it's less about how much data that you have to start with than getting in there and going, okay, well, the plan is to do this, right? And because the plan is to go to so many people, right, then this starts to make sense to do this. Let's try and design this, right, and help this to make sense, right? So yeah, there needs to be a certain amount of data. But here's the other thing and stuff as well. A lot of times we talk about data science and you think, okay, well, I need a lot of data to do something, right? But you don't always necessarily, right? You need enough data to have a pattern, right? And you can have a pattern with a very small amount of data, right? But if you have more data, then you're just like maybe more likely to have a pattern, but at the same time, you're more likely to have a lot more noise, right? Which you also have to clean out and stuff as well. So sometimes less data can sometimes be better, but generally, yeah, you want to have enough data to actually be doing a data science project. Right. Yeah. Cool. All right.